Hello everybody, it's Mike here at GameFromScratch and Happy New Year. It was a hell of a year for 2018, especially in the world of game development. What I decided to do is let's take a look back. Look at the key highlights, releases, and stuff that happened over 2018. So if you happen to miss something, hopefully I can catch you up today. And let me know if you want me to do this on an annual basis. Now, a lot happened, and I'll give you an idea. Here are the tabs we are going to go through of all of the stories that happened this year. And of course, I will link to the main article with all of the stories we are about to cover. But without further ado, let us jump in and look at what happened this year. Now, first off, Epic released 1,000 AAA quality asset pack for free for Unreal Engine. Now, this is going to be a common theme. We've got a ton of assets given away free this year. And really, Unreal and Unity really fought with each other for who could give away the most. But this was definitely a cool thing. They gave away a city and a cave environment pack, and of course this is still available, so if you're interested, do check it out. Next up, COATOOLS 1.0 for Blender was released. Now, COA stands for cutout animation, and this gives you the ability to animate 2D objects inside of Blender using bones. Very cool program, completely free. Check it out. Next up, we've got Godot 3.0 was released. Now, I should point out right now that I'm not going to go through every minor release. This is the only mention we're going to have of Godot releases, even though 3.1 beta is out there and 3.06 was released last year and many other point releases. I'm only really going to cover the major releases in this. Otherwise, it would go on and on and on forever. But it was a good year for Godot. Godot got all kinds of great functionality, and the move to 3 really revved up the 3D support in the Godot game engine. Huge year for Godot. If you haven't checked it out in a while, do be sure to check it out again. 3.1 is in beta and should be shipping any day now. Next up, we got Unity released a free 2D game kit. This was a full game level and starter assets, tutorials, etc. to get you up and running creating 2D games in Unity, completely free as well. As I mentioned, Unity and Unreal are going to fight each other a lot in the who wins the free category. Next up, we got Haxpunk 4.0 was released. Now, Haxpunk is a port of Flashpunk. Flashpunk no longer exists, so Haxpunk is the leader in this regard. I actually think I did a tutorial on this if you want to check it out or learn more. Next up, we have Unity acquired ProBuilder. This was really cool. ProBuilder is a procedural geometry generation system. There was another aspect to this also called Polybrush, and the coolest thing is as time went on, first they made it immediately free as an add-on. Now this is essentially part of Unity itself. That was a really cool development, and again, Unity and Unreal competing with each other over who can out-free each other this year. Another major release this year is Phaser 3 was released. Now, Phaser 3 is a complete rewrite of the Phaser HTML game engine. I love it. I did a tutorial on getting started with it. I think I linked it. Oh, I didn't. Should have linked it. But there is a tutorial on getting started with Phaser 3, and it's a project or an engine that I'm going to revisit in some detail on DevGame in the near future. Now, next up, we have Vulkan. It comes to iOS and macOS. Now, iOS/macOS are going to make this list a couple times, mostly for crappy reasons. Now, this one's a little bit better. Now, Vulkan is kind of really coming into its own this year. There was a lot of movement towards Vulkan. A lot of game engines added Vulkan support, and Vulkan is not on iOS or Mac platforms, but there is now there via Molten VK support. So that was really cool. I did a video on it if you want to learn a little bit more. It made Vulkan's reach even further and actually became more important, as we will see in just a second. RenderDoc, which has been around for I think 4 years now, just finally hit its 1.0 milestone. Awesome to see 1.0 releases. RenderDoc is a graphics debugger. If you haven't used it already, especially if you are developing a game engine or a renderer, do be sure to check out RenderDoc. Unreal Engine 4.19 was released. There was a lot of releases of Unreal Engine. There's, I think, 3 major releases throughout the year. We got all kinds of new functionality in each release. The big things that we saw in this one was dynamic resolution across different platforms, workflow improvements, and I don't really remember too much more about this release, but next up, let's jump on to Microsoft announced DirectX ray tracing, and this is just coming to market now. The new generation of video cards, the 2060 and 2070, 2070 and 2080 are the only ones that exist right now, but there's a 2060 in the pipeline from NVIDIA, now have support for real-time ray tracing. There's a bit of a question mark if it is worth the hit, but this technology was literally just announced back at GDC this year and is now already at market. I think maybe if this generation real-time ray tracing doesn't quite make it up, next generation will, because we're going to get to the point where our GPUs are so damn powerful that what are they going to be using the power for? Well, they'll be using it for real-time ray tracing. So this was released as an SDK as part of the DirectX 12 API, and it's got a fallback. So even if you don't support real-time ray tracing in your hardware, there is a software emulation. It's going to run slowest, but it's there. Next up, we have Epic. Let's go ahead in the giveaway game. Epic gave away $12 million in assets from the game Paragon. Now, Paragon was I think it was a MOBA or a shooter, or I don't know. I think it was a MOBA, but they shuttered it down. It never really made money. So what they did is they gave away all of the models, the assets, the levels, everything from it to developers. As long as you are using the Unreal Engine for your engine, you've got $12 million worth of assets. Now, that $12 million is from their calculation. So I don't know exactly how they came up with it. You know, they might be rent divided by the number of artists divided by etc. But still, there's a lot of great assets in there. Unity released the C# code. Now, this one sounds better than it is, but it's still a good thing. This is not open source, but Unity did make more and more of their source code available up on GitHub, help you with debugging problems you may run into as a Unity developer. It's a step in the right direction anyways. Not full on open source, but definitely a good thing to see. Next up, we have Krita 4.0 was released. Now, Krita improved a whole lot last year. If you've never heard of it, it's an open source painting application. The 4.0 has new vector functionality. Animation support got a whole lot better. It's got new text tools. There have been a couple releases since, but 4.0 obviously was the biggie. I took a look at Krita 4.0, so if you want to learn a little bit more about it, check out that video linked below. NIGHTDIVE Studios released the code for System Shock. Now, this one really wasn't a huge deal, but I am such a System Shock fanboy, I had to include it in the run-up. If you've never played it, System Shock is one of those seminal games. It helped shape the industry. This is from the Mac port, so building it is not going to be fun unless you have a copy of Code Warrior and an old Mac lying around somewhere, but you can still get in and see the C++ code behind a 15 or 20-year-old game. Again, it's not that important, but I love System Shock, so I included it on this list. Next up, we have Blender Game Engine was announced as being removed from Blender 2.8, and it was. They removed all of the code. It is gone. RIP Blender Game Engine. Now, it's not as bad as it sounds because there is a parallel port. UPBGE, I believe, is the acronym. If you Google that, it will get you close enough. There's also something called Blender Interactive Mode. It's not a full-on game engine. I'm not actually 100% certain what it's going to be, but it's going to bring some of the functionality back. But people using Blender as the game engine are kind of out of luck. You're stuck on 2.7, or you're going to be using a fork. And that means it's going to diverge from all of the great new functionality that was added to Blender 2.8. And there is a lot of functionality added in Blender 2.8. A little bit of a spoiler. Stay tuned on that one. Next up, Godot got CSG support, or constructive solid geometry. This is kind of cool. It allows you to basically real-time mash 2 or 3 shapes together, do Boolean operations on them, and kind of create levels or constructs on the fly. Really cool to see. Next up, PlayCanvas HTML 3D Game Engine turned 1. Another thing is PlayCanvas also got 2D support later on in the year. I didn't cover that story, but a 1.0 release definitely got my attention. I did a closer look at this. I also did a couple tutorials on using PlayCanvas. If you've never used it, it is a commercial web-based HTML5 game engine, and it's actually quite cool, pretty easy to use. So turned 1.0, happy birthday, PlayCanvas. Next up, Unity 2018.1 was released, and that was the mother of all releases. There was a whole lot going on in there. They added the programmable pipelines, HD and lower resolution ones for mobile platforms, etc. They changed the back-end compiler. They added an entity component system. They added a new shader graph system. They added a job system for parallel code. They added a whole lot. And then they spent kind of the rest of the year actually making this stuff less buggy. But this was a huge release. Unity 2018.1 is arguably the biggest release of Unity ever. And then they kind of followed it up with a bunch of more stuff this year. It's an impressive year for Unity, to be honest. Autodesk released Sketchbook completely for free. If you've never used it, Sketchbook is like a natural media sketching app. It's awesome. If you've never used it, do be sure to check it out. But go and use the link I linked here. Do not use the Microsoft Store link. Not the same thing. I don't know why. There's an old ruined version of it out there as well. Make sure you get the full-blown, full-fat version that is now completely free. Cool move, Autodesk. Not something I say very often, to be honest. Oh, and on that topic, this didn't make the news, but the Autodesk Stingray game engine also died, but that might have actually been 2017, which is why I didn't cover it. Visual Studio IntelliCode was launched. This is actually kind of cool. This is IntelliSense with AI behind it. It's very minor right now, so we're not going to lose our jobs quite yet, but this is the future, I think. This is one of those things, it learns your coding habits, and it kind of analyzed all of the code bases on GitHub and learned from them as well, and then just offers tips and hints on how to code better. This is going to be something to definitely keep your eye on. Not specifically the game developer, but obviously game developers are going to be of interest to this. Next up, SFML, Simple Fast Media Library, a 2D game engine, C++, 2D game framework, or media framework, released version 2.5. They don't normally have a whole lot of releases. This was the only one this year, actually, I think, but it was a significant one. I've also done 2 tutorials on SFML, so if you're interested in learning a bit more, I do have some material out there. I think they were for version 2.1, but not a whole lot changed in these releases. And next up, and this is kind of, I don't have the news for when Armory itself launched, but there's a new game engine, and that's always cool. Armory is a Blender, it comes at a perfect time too, with the Blender game engine being killed off. This is a hacks-based game engine that runs inside of Blender. I did a full tutorial series on Dev Game. You want to check that out, learn how to get started. I also got a full YouTube series on learning Armory. Armory is definitely an engine I'm keeping my eye on, and hopefully 0.6 will be released any day now, and I will update you on that. It's going to be a little bit more of a story about Armory in a bit, but we'll go with that. Now, I mentioned earlier on that Apple kind of sucked this year. Well, this was part of it. Apple deprecated support for OpenGL on iOS and macOS. They didn't earn a lot of love for this point. So now making cross-platform games that target their environments just got harder. Cool thing is there is Molten VK, so you can port your Vulkan titles over. And the reality is Apple's support for OpenGL always kind of sucked. So they're just putting a nail in the coffin of a somewhat deadish technology. But it did make single port games a lot harder to do. Now, a game engine such as Unity, Godot, or whatever have to create a metal back end to get the best performance out of those environments, or they use Molten VK. But kind of a dick move by Apple, and I don't think a lot of people were really happy about this one. Next up, Microsoft bought GitHub for $7.5 billion. Not exactly game dev related, but every developer uses GitHub in some form. And so I actually saw a lot of people leave it because Microsoft took over. Although I don't really understand that, to be honest. I don't think GitHub was any holier or better behaving of a company than Microsoft has been of late. So kind of a wash in my view, but I understand some people definitely don't like Microsoft and definitely did not like this move. But the nice thing is Git is a standard. There's 1,000 different options out there like GitLabs, etc. And people exercised their right to move. It also took a while to get regulatory approval on this. So this actually only finalized 3 or 4 months back. Next up, again, Armory. Armory got removed from Patreon, and without explanation. Now, obviously, I imagine that the Armory developer, Lubos, he knows what happened, but nobody else does. All of a sudden, Patreon just refunded everybody every cent they'd ever put into the Armory game engine. So, a bit of a cautionary tale. If you rely 100% on Patreon for your funding, yeah, maybe don't do that. Patreon kind of did not have a great year in that regard. But on that topic, if you do like what I do around here, I do have a Patreon link. Check that out down below. Next up, we got Epic Games update the Unreal Engine Marketplace revenue share. Now, this is going to be a theme with Unreal this year. They were very disruptive in the way the game engine works. Now, this is about their asset store, and really this is a bit of a minor move because there's not a whole lot on the Unreal Engine Marketplace, but what they've done is they've shifted it so you make 88% and they take 12%. Which is kind of awesome. I think it used to be 70-30, then that's what the Unity Asset Store is. So if you were an Epic or an Unreal Engine Marketplace developer, you suddenly made a lot more money. And the coolest thing is they actually went back to 2014 launch and gave everybody a cool chunk of change. Epic made a ton of money off Fortnite this year, and you can tell. Next up, Unity 2018.2 was released. So we had 2018.1 to start the year, 2018.2 to follow it up. Now, we saw a lot of things, basically improvements on what happened earlier. So the lightweight render pipeline got better. So did the HDRP, the multiple improvements to shader graph. So what we saw is the huge stuff was in 2018.1, and then the incremental improvements came in the subsequent versions. And now what I loved about the 2018.2 release as a Windows developer is it finally got HDPI support. So if you were on a 4K monitor, you can finally use it without squinting constantly. And that was an awesome upgrade. There's a preview debugger for Visual Studio Code, Pixel Perfect Camera, and the new shader graph, which actually was in the last release. So we'll just leave that one alone. Speaking of shader graphs, Visual Shader Editor just came back to Godot 3. This was a visual way of building shaders. It was an alternative to shader programming. You basically create graphs nodes of shaders without having to do any coding, although technically you're still coding, you're just not using script. But this was removed from Godot 2 with the 3.0 release. It was added back. So nice to see that added back. You want to see it in action? Check out the video. CopperCube 6 was released and also got a free version. CopperCube is an alternative game engine that does not require a whole lot of effort, but you can code in JavaScript to improve it. But otherwise, you can do almost all of it visually within the game engine. It's actually quite cool, and I did a full tutorial series on DevGame. So if you want to learn more about CopperCube 6, check out DevGame. Tile Engine, or Till Engine. Today I learned how to say it. I don't know, Tile Engine I'll go with, but there's no double E's. Was now open source. Tile Engine is a 2D graphics rendering system that tried to do that retro look. I covered this a while ago in the past. They updated the binaries on it, and so the licenses, so the way you can use, changed to the LGPL license. And the LGPL can have a couple of issues, so do be sure to be aware of exactly what they are, but that was a nice move to see. Another release this year was Raylib 2.0 was released. Now, I love Raylib. Raylib is a very beginner-focused C/C++ game framework with a ton of examples. If you want to learn game programming and you want to learn C or C++, start with Raylib. It's that simple. It is just a great project. I did some videos on it. Yeah, right here. So if you want to learn more, there's a lot in this release. Support for TCC compiler, complete removal of all external dependencies, full redesign of the audio. It's just a great project that's getting better and better and better. Unreal Engine 4.20 was released. This was the second of the 3 major releases in Unreal Engine. It's weird. They actually, Unreal and Unity both had 3 major releases this year. What we saw in this one is improved Android debugging. We saw a lot of stuff. You know, one of the things that was really going on with Unreal Engine was it just got a lot of incremental improvements this year. The big thing in this one is it got beta release of the Niagara particle system in this particular release, plus support for 2017, thank goodness, because 2015 can burn in a special place. So that's nice to see. Leap Magic support was added. I don't know how well Leap actually did this year. It was launched. I don't think there was a lot of momentum behind it, if I'm honest. But Niagara was their new scriptable particle system. That was the big part of this release. Pixel Game Maker MV was released. Now, Pixel Game Maker is from RPG Maker. Apparently, it was a different development team, and I bought it. I gave it an evaluation, and my evaluation was this thing is garbage. Some other people have different opinions. I haven't looked at it since. I should check it out, see if it's any better. But the way they released it either way too early, or I don't know what's going on with this program. But basically, the whole idea was it was to RPG Maker to 2D games. So it was supposed to make it easy and accessible for people. And I am kind of a veteran of many, many game engines, and I found this like outrageously difficult to use. So the workflow was just garbage. Hopefully it's improved at this point in time, but that seemed like a huge release, and I dropped my $70 and I might as well just have burned it, to be honest. Next up, Toy Engine was released. Toy Engine is a lightweight C++ game engine, completely open source. Cool to see. One of these little hobbyist projects. Stay tuned. You're going to hear about another one of these. If you're looking for a little project to get behind, Toy Engine might be the right one for you. It's a cool project. Check it out. Zenko 3.0 was released. Now, Zenko had a long year and a half. Zenko was a commercial product from Silicon Studios, which was an offshoot of Silicon Graphics Japan. They make a number of commercial projects, middleware for game development. They make a couple of games as well. They were developing a C#-powered game engine, and then they stopped. And then they opened it up for the community, and now it is an open source project. 3.1 was just released, so there is active development behind it. Definitely cool to see. It's a very clean, very polished, lighter weight alternative to Unity. Do check it out if you are looking for, Unity but open source. Zenko is probably as close as they come, and it is a beautiful engine, by the way. Wave Engine 2.5 was released. Now, this one's still under development, but it's gone really quiet. Their website doesn't say that. Now, Wave Engine is a lot like Zenko. Same kind of concept. It's open source. Yeah, it's an open source engine. 2.5 release saw a number of things added: GLTF, AR support, bullet physics, etc. Then again, they're not blogging, and there's not a lot of activity on their site. So I really hope that this engine is doing well. It's interesting. I checked it out in the past. If you want, check out that closer look and see a little bit more about it. Another cool thing that was being added, Godot 3.1, which is coming soon. So this is a preview thing, but they added a completely optional typing system. Now, if you don't use Godot, the primary scripting language is GDScript, and GDScript is typeless. That means that the type is basically as it's determined. It is. So if I assign the to a value, it becomes a string. If I assign 42 to a value, it becomes an int. If I assign 42 to a string, it becomes a string again. So that's what typeless means. Sometimes you don't want that. Sometimes it makes harder to determine how your code is, or sometimes it allows you to create bugs, such as accidentally adding a string to an int. So that's why typed options are sometimes great. This gives you the ability to say, hey, now, we don't want you to be able to add those two values together because this needs to be a string. And that's what typed values go in. Now, the cool thing is it's completely optional, but it is awesome to see that added. Now, another thing that happened this year is Cocos Creator 2.0 was released. Actually, Cocos Creator 1.8, 1.9, and then 2.0 was released. Now, 1.9 release sucked. They broke everything. It was a dumb release. I refactored a bunch of crap that they really shouldn't have. Before that, 1.8 was a great game engine. I really wish 1.9 hadn't have happened. Speaking of which, I did do a full Cocos Creator tutorial series. It's on the 1.8 version, so some of it's broken now because of meaningless refactoring. If you can't tell, I'm minorly bitter about this. But anyways, at 2.0, what they've done is basically forked it. It is now going to have an underlying 3D game engine. Still going to be a 2D game engine ultimately, but you're going to be able to do more 2.5D or 3D integration with it. They're also kind of doing it so that they're going to maintain the existing version and then the 3D version as separate tracks. That never ends well, so it'll be interesting to see how that turns out. Next up, Filament open source PBR renderer was released. Yeah, so Android team released a renderer cross-platform, runs on OpenGL on Linux, Mac OS, and Windows, OpenGL ES on Android, and Vulkan on Android, Linux, Mac via Molten VK we mentioned earlier, and Windows. Really pretty rendering results, by the way. Check out the video if you're interested in that. And then Valve announced Proton. This is basically giving the ability to run Windows. It's kind of like Wine on steroids, giving you the ability to run Direct3D 11 and 12 games directly on Linux. So Linux developers just got a huge library of games, and it's an experimental phase right now, but you should basically be able to turn on any game in your Steam. Right now it's curated, but I've heard people experimenting with just about any Windows Steam game, and most of them are working. So big step forward for Linux gamers, at least. Not sure how it is going to help or hurt the Linux ecosystem. Interesting to see, but Valve Proton was definitely a big move in the Linux space. Now, I mentioned earlier about the toy engine. Well, there was another one released this year called the LIMON engine. This is another C++ game engine open source with a built-in editor. This one is LGPL licensed. I did a video on it. If you're interested in checking out another small game engine, do be sure to check out LIMON. And then we've got Tiled 1.2 is released. Now, Tiled had a number of releases, but I picked 1.2 as the big step because this one included some pretty big features such as multi-map worldview, multi-layer selection, improved object and polygon editing tools. Tiled is an open source map editor, and it is getting better and better and better and better all the time. And I've done a tutorial on it if you want to learn more. Excuse me, losing my voice. Google and Unity teamed up to announce open source matchmaking. Basically, not a lot of details on it, but it's going to run on their technology. So if you want to have your networking hosted on Google technology using Unity, there is this partnership that should help you all out. CryEngine 5.5 was released. CryEngine is kind of the little engine that couldn't, and then the little engine that could. They've kind of reinvented themselves. They're leaner, they're smaller, and they're more focused. And actually, it is a much more usable engine than it's ever been before. Some of the things that really sucked about it in the past is the developer experience sucked, the documentation sucked, and that kind of thing. It wasn't polished. And with their fork, their CryEngine 5.5 stuff, it is getting much nicer to use. Also, they've switched the primary programming language out to C#. So I did a hands-on with CryEngine 5.5. Not sure if I hands-on there in this video or not, but if you're interested in seeing what has become of CryEngine 5.5, it's a very changed engine in a lot of ways. By the way, I don't have a particular release on here, but Lumberyard also had a number of releases. Lumberyard is Amazon's fork of CryEngine 3.7, so they've diverged quite a bit, and they've gone in very different routes, by the way. Next up, Minecraft was open source, parts of it. They opened up the Brigadier and Data Fixer upper code, and they're going to be opening up more and more of it as time goes on. I haven't really checked to see if they've done more, but if you want to check out some Java code, MIT license that went behind making Minecraft work, that was kind of a cool release. And this one took the world by storm. If you did not check it out, if there's one thing you'll take away from this video, go check this out. There was a tool called Materialize. It was written inside of Unity. Eventually, it was open sourced, actually, and it allows you to create height, diffuse, normal, metallic, smoothness, edge, and ambient occlusion maps all from a single image. But most impressively, it does a very, very good job of it. Check out this video. Again, this was kind of my surprise hit of the year. I'm really impressed with Materialize, and it is now open source as well. PixelMash, pixel art software was released. PixelMash is really kind of cool. Check it out here. It is commercial software. It's from Nevercenter, the makers of the Silo 3D app. It's a non-destructive workflow 2D transformation pixel art tool. It's kind of unique in its approach. Definitely worth checking out, and there is a 7-day free trial, so you got nothing to lose if you want to check that out. Discord store was launched. Discord got into the game. They're competing now with the likes of Steam, a few others that are going to come later in this video, Good Old Games, etc. So there is another store out there. This one is aimed at indie developers specifically. So it's more of an itch.io competitor, I would say, but always nice to see more stores, more options for indie gamers, especially with some of the stuff that happened with Steam this year. Then we've got Unity 2019.1 Alpha was released. This was in November. This is actually, it wasn't a huge release. This is nothing like 2018.1 Beta. Like, that was huge and had all kinds of just gigantic changes. This one was more, let's make Unity nicer to use kind of stuff, not let's completely change Unity. So we saw just things like a new shortcut manager, incremental improvements, GPU light mapping. But what's cool here is this is an alpha. They've never done alphas before. So this is something new in the Unity world. We're getting faster revisions, earlier versions. So you're going to see less and less huge changes between versions, but we're going to see them more often. So that's a neat new move. Unity also released a gigantic FPS example. This is kind of like their 2D example, but in 3D and commercial quality. Do check it out. I showed you the video in action in this particular video. It is impressive what they've done with this guy. Unreal also released Unreal Engine 4.21. This is the last of our releases. The new experimental feature was pixel streaming. I'm trying to remember what was in this. Niagara improved. It added Nintendo Switch support. Yeah, there wasn't a huge amount in this particular release, but what we saw is a whole lot of the stuff that they learned making Fortnite for mobile got ported into Unreal Engine. So it just got a whole lot better at making Android and iOS games that perform well. So that was a big part of this actual release. It was just mobile polish that they learned dogfooding while making Fortnite mobile, which, by the way, made them $100 billion. And here is the big one. Blender 2.8 beta was released. Hopefully the final version is any day now, but if you want to check out Blender's 2.8, check out this video. You will be blown away by how awesome Blender is now if you haven't used it in a while. As we mentioned earlier on, Game Engine is gone, so if you're a Game Engine person, you're not so great on this release, but everybody else, it is just amazing what they've done, especially the Eevee real-time renderer, the improvements to the 2D functionality from it's basically a full 2D creation and animation suite now, and on and on and on it goes. But the new real-time render is just staggeringly cool to look at. So do check out Blender if you have not in a while. When this final release comes in 2019, Blender is going to really seriously compete with all the big boys. Duality 3.0 was released. Duality is a C# game engine. I checked it out in Closer Look series. There was a rewrite of the entire rendering pipeline, and a lot of the underlying stuff was updated. They've also improved the performance a great deal with this release. If you are interested, I did do a closer look at it. I also do a bit of a hands-on in this video if you're interested in learning more about Duality. It is an open source 2D game engine. It's kind of like Unity Lite, but focused on 2D. It's a cool project. It's very easy to work with, to be honest. And then on the topic of game stores and disruption, Epic launched their game store this year, and what was just staggering about it is they came out with an 88-12 split. Now, another story I didn't cover was Steam. Steam really kind of screwed indies this year, but they came out and they said, hey, we're going to take a lesser royalty if you sell, and then it was something like $5 million or more, your royalty goes down a little bit. You know, they're really kind of trying to keep AAAs on their platform, which they're slowly losing to other services and options, or people like Fortnite that just created their own online store. And basically that's what Epic did. Epic created their own online store, said to hell with you Steam, to hell with you App Store, to hell with you iOS, and they created, actually not iOS, but all the other ones, they basically created their own store, and then they were allowing other developers to sell on that store. But what's impressive is it's an 88-12 split, so that is unheard of. The norm is 70-30. So developers developers are going to be keeping a whole lot more money, and even more impressive, if you develop using the Unreal Engine, the 5% royalty comes out of the 12% side of things. So you can basically, if you are creating your game using Unreal Engine, you can publish it on Epic Store for free, essentially, and then you get 88% of the money earned. Epic is just really changing the industry this year. NVIDIA open source PHYSX 4.0. They actually open source PHYSX 3.4 as well, and then they released 4.0 a few days later. PHYSX is their physics simulation system. Hopefully we'll see it on other platforms and other options going forward, but cool to see it was open sourced. It was open sourced under the BSD3 license, which is a fairly liberal license. Oh yeah, sorry, I screwed up my story a bit. I said Cocos 2 was released and then 2.1 was going 3D. So that's where the fork that I was mentioning earlier. So Cocos is switched to an underlying 3D game renderer, and they forked their code between the 2.0 version and the 2.1 version. I think it's a massive mistake, but interesting to see how that one turns out. Epic announced a free cross-platform online service. Now this is, again, disruptive. Remember I mentioned earlier on where Unity teamed up with Google to provide online stuff, like so matchmaking and that kind of thing? Well, Epic did the same thing, but they made it free. And they're launching it with a C SDK along with Unreal Engine and Unity integration to start with. And literally, it's just free. Now, I imagine they're going to take a cut of any DLC type sales being done on this, probably using that 8812. But if you're just looking for straight up matchmaking and you're not selling anything, completely free networking, this is really going to screw some people over. Especially when you get down here, they're actually offering voice comm stuff free. So they're going to be, going against Discord and Mumble and TeamSpeak and those guys, because that functionality is going to be built into this infrastructure. And again, they learned all this stuff creating Fortnite and scaling Fortnite, and now they are opening it up to everybody. It runs on Amazon's technology. I'm still waiting to see what the catch is here, because there's no way they can afford to make this completely free. So there is a catch. But this is definitely game-changing for the industry. And that's it. That was 2018 in review. Now, there are 1,000 other stories if you really want to go through the entirety of Game from Scratch for last year. I cover and document most things as they happen. But if I missed a glaringly obvious huge story of the year, please do let me know in the comments down below. But like I said, that was a pretty packed year. We just covered a whole lot of stuff, and I have no voice left, so I'm going to end it here. Hopefully you found that useful. Do you like me to do a recap? So the end of 2019, should I do the same thing? Do you want to look back at the year that we had? And what did you think of the year? Like, my God, I gotta say, Unity and Unreal really one-to-one each other. Like, you can have this for free, and you can have this for free, and we added this functionality also, so did we, and so on and so forth. I would actually argue that Unity advanced more. Unity became a better engine over the time of the year than Unreal did. But I'd also argue that Unreal was better to start the year. So it's more a matter of Unity coming up to parity. With the HD render pipeline, it's now actually competing with Unreal for graphics fidelity. So in some ways, Unity had more improvements to make because Unity needed more improvements, but they definitely improved this year. But from the business side of things, oh my God, Epic really mixed things up. And then on the open source side of things, we had some really awesome things happening. We had, great time. Go away. We had some huge moves in open source, such as the release of Armory, the release of Blender 2.8, and the massive switch to Godot 3.0, including C# support and the brand new 3D renderer and everything else. It's just a great year to be a game developer. I'm just amazed at what stuff happened this year. And let me know, what was your biggest thing from the year? This was probably safe to say the most forward progressive year ever for indie developers. There's more stores, there's more engines, there's more tools, and more assets, and a lot of this stuff is free, and it's just an amazing time to be alive. So let's hope 2019 is even better. Let me know what you think. Comments down below, and Happy New Year, folks. See you later.